Mrs. Sharonki, anyone else signed up?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Richard Hoover.
Could we get a full name and an address as well, please?
Of course. Richard Hoover, 419 Liberty Hall Road, Front Royal, 22630. As you know, at issue is one of the veterans' monuments that stands on our county courthouse lawn. Dedicated July 4th, 1911, it has the names of some 600 Warren County veterans written upon it. The 5,000 to 6,000 people who gathered there that day, quote, commemorated the courage and patriotism of the men from Warren County who served honorably in the Confederate Army. To those who fought and lived, it read, and to those who fought and died, to those who gave much and to those who gave all. Many of those 600 names are followed by the letter K, which meant that they were killed. As such, these 600 names cut right through the heart of that community, as in fact it does today. They represented not only veterans, but mothers, fathers, wives, children, from whom they would be parted, often forever. As to why they fought, they belonged to Virginia, as others in our land belong to, say, Massachusetts or to Ohio. And they would go with Virginia wherever and whenever, for in those days, one's primary allegiance was to the sovereign state, not to a United States of America. There was no such thing as a Pledge of Allegiance, and state militias far outweighed the federal army both in numbers and in prestige. It was state forces, for example, which largely fought and won the Mexican War. Robert E. Lee, no secessionist, resigned his Army commission only after Virginia had passed her ordinance of secession, not before. And the young John Singleton Mosby was confused, not knowing whether his Virginia would go with the North or join the Confederacy. He decided, as did his friends, to, quote, go with the flow, to go with Virginia, whether she went north or south. That's pretty much what happened here in Warren County, with the large majority of those 600 veterans who, whether drafted or enlisted, went with Virginia. For that was the sovereign state culture which serves as the background to our Confederate Veterans Monument. To look at it and proclaim, as someone recently did, that, quote, it makes me sick to my stomach, is to betray a disinterest in the past, an ignorance of culture, of literature, to reduce the telling of history to politics, if not to race. This slovenly cancellation effort impoverishes us and our children intellectually, and if permitted to thrive, will only disunite our community for years to come. And yet those calling for cancellation wrap themselves in the mantle of unity. Instead, it would be unity were there no conflict between the preservation of Confederate monuments, museums, and libraries, and the establishment of monuments, libraries, and museums to slavery in Warren County. I guarantee that patriotic Civil War enthusiasts, whether of the Union or the Confederate orientation, would welcome taking educational and commemorative steps with fellow Americans to ensure that the whole story of Warren County's role in the Civil War could be told. So instead of tearing down the culture of the so-called, quote, other, unquote, might a common effort to understand the past, if not one another, not be a grand bargain right here in Warren County? As a board member of the Warren Heritage Society, I know that Laura Virginia Hale archivists are working hard to gather stories of local African American history and to tell those stories. Let us imagine where this could lead. The dismantling of the historic courthouse monument would be a gigantic, if not irrecoverable, step in the opposite direction. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, sir.
Mrs. Shiraki, has anyone else signed up?
Suzanne Freilich.
Suzanne, your full name and address, please.
Suzanne W. Sally, 295 West Main Street, Front Royal, Virginia. Good morning. I am Suzanne Wood Salick, a member of the Warren Rifles Chapter 934, United Daughters of the Confederacy. And my family has been a resident of this area since, I think, 1754, before we were Warren County. We have been in existence, the chapter has been in existence since September 4th, 1905. One of our first projects was a memorial to the Confederate veterans. It took over 5 years to raise the money. Warren County was so economically devastated by the war between the states that not until the 1890s could we replace the bridges on the Shenandoah that had been burned by both armies starting with 1862. The counties had to build the bridges then, with no assistance from the state. In 1890, we had to use the pilings of the original bridges. And if you look down the river, you can see, as you cross the first bridge, you can see the little islands of rock. And that's the first pilings. And remember, they lasted until 1890. The 1890s bridges had to use them. And I have a correction. They lasted until 1940, when the new bridges then were put in place. So, we finally completed the memorial, and the old soldiers did their best to recreate the rosters of soldiers, and these names are on the monument. Here is a program, in case you all don't have one, for the county.
Thank you.
It was a memorial to the soldiers. It was not to glorify anything. It was their heartfelt tribute to their sons. There were a few mothers still living. To their cousins, brothers, and uncles. and that has stood since 1911. And we ask that you carefully consider anything about removing that structure.
Mrs. Shiraki, has anyone else signed up?
Bruce Colton.
Morning, Mr. Colton. Your full name and address, please.
Yes, sir. My name is Richard Bruce Colton. I live at 558 Rolling Mountain Road, Bentonville, Virginia. That's actually in Browntown. No longer have a post office there, so they use Bentonville. 73 years old. I'm here to talk about the monument, of course. Registered voter in Warren County. Pay my taxes. I do my best to be a good, upstanding citizen. I want to recount a few things, and one of my earliest memories is back when I lived with my parents. I'm talking 5, 6 years old. Lived on Church Street, and both my parents worked. At the time, they had enlisted the services of a woman named Hazel Keys to help take care of me during the day, and she would get myself and 2 other friends that were still our local citizens. And instead of sitting at the house, as people do today, and watch TV or play games, she would take us for walks throughout Warren County, or Front Royal, excuse me. Church Street, as you know, bordered on Prospect and then runs down to Main Street. So we would, whatever route she wanted, she was the adult and would take us for walks. Anyway, we'd walk down Church Street, possibly turn right or left on Main, go up. If we turn left, of course. In those days, this was early 1950s, there was Murphy's Theater on the left side. Continue on up, eventually we come to the courthouse. There, depending upon what she wanted to do, we would go right or left. But always there in front of the courthouse, we would stop, and I was amazed by the monument to the soldiers. And she would explain and go on about that. It was wonderful to get an education at that age, to get me interested in history and Warren County and why things were as they were and what was what. But anyway, she would recount stories. I would say she was in her 60s at that time, probably born 1890, somewhere around there. But she would tell us about our town, our history, our citizens, our heritage, and it was just wonderful. So I would ask her about that monument, and what she would tell me, and I remember some of that to this day, that it was a monument to the soldiers who had come from Warren County that fought in the war between the states. Never once did she mention, or was I ever told by anybody else in Warren County, that it was a monument to slavery or to hatred. That was not the purpose of it. One thing that she told me, and I still remember this every time I write a letter or write the word Virginia, I remember her distinctly telling me that when you grow up, I couldn't write at the time, I was 5 or 6 years old. She said, when you learn to write, always write out Virginia, the full word, don't abbreviate. That's showing disrespect. That's the way the mindset was, and it continues. And I think about that, I'm not joking. Every time I write the word Virginia, I write it out full. Anyway, to repeat myself on this, I have never walked past that monument. As I drove past it this morning, I thought of slavery or hatred. Anyway, more about myself. I attended the local schools in Front Royal and graduated from Warren County High School in 1965. Like all 18-year-old males, I had registered with the selective service system, and I was drafted shortly thereafter in 1966. Just like the men whose names are on that wall that Mr. Hoover referred to, the 600 of them plus, and I don't know how many of them were drafted, but I would say it was a large number of them. There was no choice in 1966 or in 1861 to 65 but to enlist. Yes, you could be a draft dodger. You could go to Canada. You could do other things to escape the draft. I chose not to do that. I understand from reading what I've been educated that if you resisted the draft or you were a deserter during the war between the states, you'd be shot. Treatment was not as harsh in 1966, but still was not good. As for myself, I spent 6 years with the United States Army, 2 active, 4 inactive. I spent a year in Vietnam. All of 1968 I was in Vietnam with the 25th Infantry Division, also known as Tropic Lightning. I'm sure there are other veterans here today. I'm not sure of you gentlemen's credentials, but I'm sure there are other veterans here that know and feel as I do. The monument on the courthouse lawn honors the veterans of Warren County, and is on the same lawn, I want to point out, as the other monuments, memorials to World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and I'm sure in time to come there will be others added there for wars that have, conflicts that have continued since then. Are they the next to be removed? That's what, we're starting something here now that it's not going to end with what's done with that monument. It's going to continue on. The counterculture that's attacking all of our history in this country, that's what will happen. Start with this and it'll be a domino effect. To back that up, I belong to the VFW, I belong to the American Legion, anything military that I can belong to. Yesterday in the mail I got the current issue of the VFW magazine, August 2020, page 6, article, VFW condemns vandalism on World War II memorial. And with the recent protests, marching, rioting, the World War II memorial was desecrated. It's right here. If I would like to read it, I'll be glad to stay and you can read it. I don't know about you people. On my father's side, he had 2 brothers. All of my father and both brothers served in the United States Navy in World War II. On my mother's side, which was from Warren County, she had 2 brothers. Both of them served in the United States Army in World War II. One of my uncles, Joseph Williams, which died recently, or a year ago, joined at 15 years of age, had a very illustrious career through World War II and Korea. He was given a battlefield commission by General Patton at the Battle of El Guitar. Silver Star, went on and was a hero in my opinion. Anyway, I take the suggestion of removing the monument as a direct slap in the face to all veterans of all wars that have fought the United States of America has fought in. In closing, I'd like to tell you one thing, the personal interest. As I said, I've lived in Warren County, probably will die here, I don't plan on leaving. But I've known many people in Warren County as I have lived here. Stuart Rudisill, who used to be a member of the Board of Supervisors, his father, Raymond Rudisill, lived in Warren County, up in Browntown, had the Glen Manor Farm. And one day I was with him and another illustrious citizen of Warren County, Smith Baldwin. I'm sure you fellows know him or knew of him. And we were taking care of some cattle, slaughtering some cattle for Raymond, and I was helping. Anyway, we had a lull. I forget exactly what happened, but we had to stop for a little while. So there's nothing to do but talk. And Smith, being quite the talker as he was, brought up his career and all that. We got talking about. So my grandfather, I told them, fought Pancho Villa on the Mexican border in 1915, 16, whatever it was. Smith Baldwin responded with immediately by how his grandfather had fought with Robert E. Lee. And lastly, Raymond Rudisill, Father Stuart Rudisill, told the story of how he had attended the ceremony on July the 4th, 1911 with his grandfather for the unveiling of the monument as where it stands today. And we sat there and thought for a little while and said that he had told the best story, and he was proud, and we were both proud of him. So that concludes what I have to say. I would ask that you please take all of this into consideration from a veteran standpoint and not remove the monument. Thank you, one and all.
Again, no one else has signed up. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Your name and address, please. We'll get to you in just a second.
Name and address, please.
Gary Dwayne Vaughn, 241 Powell Street, Fernley, Virginia. I'm here to speak about the monument. There was a fellow that was young, was just starting life and newlywed, lived in the ridge above Harmony Hollow, 1960. Just married. When the war broke out, he walked 7 miles into town and enlisted with the Warren Rifles. And I think it was on his 3rd engagement, small engagement, that he was captured. It's a prisoner of war camp. Now that's bad enough, but word came back that he was killed in action. And got back to his wife, and she mourned for a 1.5 years and moved on, remarried. Well, lo and behold, when the war ends, he comes back. And he would just did the right thing and moved on, started a family, and I believe he was related to Mr. Fox. His name was Anthony Fox. He's got a little grave up on top of the mountain. If you don't know where it is, you'll never find it. It's up above Land's Run, just a flagstone, tombstone. So really, the only way that anyone can remember him, or visually remember him, is on that plaque, the monument. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Maybe give your name and address.
My name is Samuel Porter. I'm from 216 Fletcher Street, good old Front Royal, Virginia. So originally, I tried to make sure I followed your all's rules, and I checked the agenda last night, and the statue wasn't on there, and I see that it's added. So I don't have everything that I wanted to say, and I'm definitely not ready to present a petition to you, but there's a lot of things that I just hacked through that I definitely would like to mention. First, I'm a U.S. veteran of the United States Navy, honorably discharged. I got hurt in my service. I'm a veteran that's not for the statue. Get that out there. I also just listened to supporters of removing the statue are ignorant. I'm several degrees, all honors, summa cum laude. I'm far from ignorant, okay? But this isn't about me, the individual. This is about the people, collectively. Black people, people of color. There is surely no time for humor or sarcasm at a moment like this. I'm sure you can hear the frustration in my voice. It's really hurtful to hear some of those things, like I'm out to tear my town up or something. But again, there's no time for humor or sarcasm. But how in the heck is it that I have to try to explain heritage and history to people who rely on heritage and history for their support of keeping it there? Maybe it's somewhat hard for some people who rely on history and heritage to understand such militant commitment to the bondage of others. But 4 million enslaved African Americans in the South represented the country's greatest financial asset. Answering your question, was slavery really important to the Civil War? Make sure to begin in South Carolina. That's the site of our present and past catastrophe. South Carolina was the first state to secede. 2 months after the election of Abraham Lincoln, it was in the South that the Civil War began, when the Confederacy fired on Fort Sumter. The state's cashy belly was neither vague nor hard to comprehend, and I quote, "A geographical line has been drawn across the Union, and all the states north of that line have united in the election of a man to the high office of President of the United States, whose opinions and purposes are hostile to slavery. He is to be entrusted with the administration of the common government because he has declared that the government cannot endure permanently half slave, half free, and that the public mind must rest in the belief that slavery is in the course of ultimate extinction. This sectional combination for the submersion of the Constitution has been aided in some of the states by elevating to citizenship persons who by the supreme law of the land are incapable of becoming citizens, and their votes have been used to inaugurate a new policy hostile to the South and destructive to its beliefs and safety." Now, I'm not sure who all in here business, inclined or intelligent, but to know that over $3 billion was at stake, I'm sure that the South wasn't too happy about it, and that was based off of slavery. A couple other things I'd like to say. History is vast. It literally spreads millennia. It covers different people, places, things, events. In respect of your time, there's no way that I can give a full history lesson on what I know to negate some of the things that you just heard. But let's be clear. There are 2 petitions out in your county right now. There's one in support, and there's one in support. There's one to support its staying, and one to support its remove and relocation. I like to make that very clear. Remove and relocation does not equate to destruction. So if you hear anything like that, you heard it from the source. Relocation and removal does not equate to destruction. I'm very much against that. It brings me to one point, and at first I really honestly didn't want to mention it, but I got to. I've heard from no black people or people of color today. There's no black people or people of color who have signed the petition to keep it there. Do minorities' voices matter to our county? I'm wondering, because what I've heard and how I've been treated on Facebook and how the people who have supported this removal of this statue, that is a symbol of oppression to people like me, it's crazy. I wish that some of you could see some of the things that the messages that my family have gotten. I'm coming from a diverse background. My mom and my grandmother, that side of my family is white. The other half is black. But I'm telling you, as a veteran, as an intelligent human being, as a young black man, that symbol stands for oppressive views to people like me. And there's no way that you can think that I'll ever receive justice walking into a courtroom when I have to be a little, worried about what the people inside of that place may represent, given what they have in their front yard there. Another thing, then I'm finished. I know that everyone has things to do. I'm appreciative of your time. My idea is not to divide our town, it's to unify. And I'll make a couple of other things clear. You had another petition that was for support of removal. And that other petition that was supporting removal, I don't think the other side would have liked at all. They wanted it gone, melted, broken down, whatever. Again, I'm telling you, to me, relocation and removal does not equal destruction. It is a symbol of oppression, though. And I think that our county can do much better. We don't have a good history as it concerns racism. I think it'd be very good for us to. It's a good token. It shows that not only our county, it shows our state, it shows the Shenandoah Valley, it shows our country that we're better than that. Of course, it may be heritage and history, but make sure when you rely on that heritage and history, you get into the context of what that heritage and history really stands for. Because I assure you, it was definitely over slavery. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Yes, ma'am. Could we get your name and address as well, please?
Stevie Hubbard, 1169 Elm Street, Front Royal, Virginia.
I'm a little emotional today, so, and like Sam, we weren't aware that this was being put on the agenda. So I don't have my thoughts as organized and written out as I would like. And I'm actually feeling a little disheartened because some of you have my cell phone number. So if it was something that was going to be addressed, I would have liked to have had the opportunity to have 5 or 6, 7 people from our point of view to discuss how we feel of the statute, but we weren't afforded that opportunity. I've listened to what everyone has said. If you look at the petitions that were authored, they were 2 weeks prior to Front Row Unite's authoring a petition. One was for the complete removal of the statue. They don't want it in our county. And then the other was for it to stay exactly where it is. And so in an effort to compromise and unite and to consider all feelings involved, we thought the best compromise would be to keep the statue intact, but move it to a more appropriate location. So those that do have family members can honor their loved ones at that monument, and it can be less offensive to those that are offended by the statue by its placement at our county courthouse. I've heard people discuss how families were figuratively ripped apart and hurt during that war. It was not figuratively for Black people and slaves. They were raped, they were beaten, they were ripped apart as families, to the point that Sam probably can't retrace his historical roots. I can't, my children can't. So we can't know what our great-great-great-granddaddy was feeling and doing at that time of that war, because we were completely disenfranchised. Now, I understand, because I am a compassionate person, and I am a Christian, and I understand that there were probably many people that didn't have a dog in that fight, that had no business even being in that war, because it didn't benefit them, that they were just going along with the status quo and doing what they needed to do to honor the place in which they lived. And I want to honor those people. I understand that pain. I understand that completely. I don't think that their memory is going to be wiped out by taking a statue and moving it across the street away from our courthouse. The last time I checked, statues didn't teach me history. The history that many of you have been taught isn't exactly accurate. And we know that there was a movement to revise this history in a way that made the Confederacy more palatable. We know that for fact. And we understand that many in our county are benefactors of that exact history. And so we don't want to offend. But when I look at our group, I don't know many that care if it stays. I don't know many that care to ever see it again. But I know that we were able to go to them and say, consider these people and how they feel and what this statue means to them. And so in an effort to do that, they were able to consider those people and say, maybe we don't need to have, destruction of the monument. Maybe we can just move it. Maybe that way we can honor them too. But I haven't seen one person from the side that is saying to keep the statue in its rightful place consider what that statue says to a person of color. And I urge any of you that are wanting it to say to help me understand how that statue, how my children are supposed to look at that statue and say, oh, that doesn't say that I'm a second-class citizen. that doesn't say that the atrocities and the terrors that happen to me and my people don't matter. Explain to me how they're to surmise that. Because I've asked many on Facebook to do that, and I haven't had a single person step up and tell me how I'm supposed to explain that to my children. And so, I don't know if there'll be a vote on this today, or what you all plan on doing, because as I said, I didn't even know this was happening today. But I will tell you, there are 2 petitions going in town. There's 3, actually. One for its complete removal, that was gaining traction, which prompted us to make our petition that is a compromise, we feel. And then there's one for the statue to stay right where it is. And I will tell you, they are neck and neck. I can look at it from 1 hour to the next. And one petition is winning, and if I factor the 2 that call for it to be moved, there is a majority of your people that want it to be moved. So I hope that you will take time to maybe give a more appropriate hearing to the discussion of these statues, where you can hear from all of your constituents and not the select few that knew that this was coming, and that we can work together to figure out how to fairly represent all of the people in our county and to be inclusive to all of the people in our county. Because I can tell you, there is a sect of your county that doesn't feel included, and they are hurting. And they're looking to you for leadership, and they're looking for you to care about how they feel. I thank you guys for your time, and I hope that we can work together on a peaceful solution for everyone concerned.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We'll get to you right away, sir.
Yes. I'll yield.
No, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is David Silak, 165 Hickerson Hollow Road, Front Royal, Virginia. Mr. Chairman and members, first I want to thank Mr. Navy. Read that you're retiring today, and I want to thank you for your service, or retiring at the end of the year. I want to thank you for your service to our county. That you've changed our rescue in our county for the better. Thank you. Next, how did we get to this point, and why are we at this point? Before the last 3 or 4 months, by a show of your hands, I would ask that you tell me who had ever heard of the phrase cancel culture. You had. That's where we are today. Cancel culture refers to the popular practice of withdrawing support for or canceling public figures and companies after they have done or said something considered objectionable or offensive. But increasingly, it is meant to erase parts of our history. History as a people, as a nation, are now being rewritten or erased. And it doesn't end with just a monument to Lee or Jackson. They've now gone on to Jefferson and Washington, Christopher Columbus, and countless others, including a black regiment that fought for the Union. That monument has been defaced. There are now calls to change street names, school names, county names, all in the name of this cancel culture. Now, people who do not agree with things from the past just want to erase or cancel these events or periods because it makes them unhappy. What we are witnessing now is nothing new in the annals of history. Removal of statues is something that really started to increase with commonality at the turn of the 1900s. A group called the Bolsheviks made a great art of statue and art removal, of things that triggered them, or upset them, or caused them to feel uncomfortable or what reminded other people of other times. We see it continuing here today. The Bolsheviks started with the immediate removal of statues, even eagles, and then it was churches. Then the brown shirts of the Nazi Party started to tear down monuments in Germany, then Austria, then Poland, then France, and the rest of Europe. Eventually, they too went around and started attacking churches. When the communists came to Eastern Europe after the Second World War, the removal of the past continued, and they too destroyed more churches. Last fall when I was in Budapest, it was shocking to see all that had been destroyed by every communist regime that had taken power, and the removal of art and history and monuments to the Hungarian people spanning millennia. Skip forward to the early 2000s. We had a little lull in it. Except for the Chinese. I forgot the Chinese. Chinese did their communist Chinese, the Mao Zedong, and Deng Xiaoping removed countless monuments, statues, Buddhas, and they eventually took out religion and churches there too, especially in Shanghai, where there was an established Christian church. Skipping forward to the 2000s, it was the Taliban. And this is the dramatic removal of history, if I may approach, Mr. Chairman. This is what happens when you decide you don't like monuments because you're offended by them. This is exactly what happens. This monument survived, or these Buddhas survived 1,700 years. But the Taliban were offended by them. Inanimate objects carved in stone. They didn't have names of local people attached to them. Skip forward to 2016. And a group called ISIS comes about. And they started in Mosul and destroyed statues from the beginning of time in the Fertile Crescent. And it didn't stop in Iraq. They went up into Syria and they started destroying actually peoples that offended them. The Yazidi, if you remember them, most of them are gone now. And then they got to a place called Palmyra. Palmyra had managed to survive since the Roman Empire. But the extremists of ISIS were offended by Roman and Greek ruins. So they removed them. You can see pictures of entire civilizations just removed because people were offended by a statue or a column, etc. That's where we are today, in Warren County. Like the Bolsheviks, the Communists, Chinese, the Nazis, the Taliban before them, ISIS, attacking and destroying every church in its path. Ladies and gentlemen, the cancel culture we hear a lot about today is the modern American version of these extremist groups. At some point, we have to say no. We see it happening in Richmond. We see it happening in Washington, D.C., in Columbus, in Baltimore, in Portland, in Seattle, in San Francisco, and many other places across this fruited plain. These are hard, cold facts. As Sir Winston Churchill famously stated, united wishes and goodwill cannot overcome brute facts. Truth is incontrovertible. Panic may resent it, ignorance may deride it, malice may distort it, but there it is. And that's what we have. First, it was Lee and Jackson monuments. They want it removed. They have now moved on to Christopher Columbus, Jefferson, Washington, and many others. now here in our town, a memorial to 600 dead men and boys. It's not a monument to slavery. It's not a monument to preservation of slavery. It's not a monument to the Confederate government. It's not a monument to the Confederate cause. It's a monument to 600 men who were drafted or served in the Army, who had their citizenship restored to them by an act of Congress, who were made American veterans by an act of Congress, who this monument is a tribute to and in memory of. It's not about anything else. Same monument, the same people calling for the removal of monuments in this council culture have now, in their country, moved on to cherubims, angels, and stained glass statues of Christ. It won't stop unless you say no. When it is very easy to get into emotion on certain things. And my family, while I don't look it, when my grandfather moved to this town, was a person of color. He was, I believe, the first or second Arabic family here after Mr. Shibley to move to this town. He got called names. The monument, his family didn't serve there in that war. Our family wasn't even here on the silent side. Not even in the country. Still in Lebanon. But we know, and we know from our experience, our shared American experience, slavery was terrible. There's no possible good thing about it. And thank God it's a dead institution. The men who were honored, as I said, aged from 14 and 15. We know of one 17-year-old. They were farmers, merchants, and employees. All of the names on that monument, of all of them, 5 families, we believe had slaves. Not 600. I dare say anybody today or in 1861 would be willing to give their life for Walter Mabe or Cheryl Cullors or Archie Fox or Dolores Oates or Tony Carter to keep their slave. I certainly wouldn't. I wouldn't sacrifice my life and my family's safety for any of you all to own another person. It wouldn't happen. And to believe that these 600 men who were mostly drafted were willing to do that, it's beyond comprehension. Why throw your own family into that risk? They served because most of them were called or ordered to. In the North, it was very common for people who had been drafted who had money to pay someone else to go serve for them. That occasionally happened in the South. But the South was poor, so you had to go. In the North, by the end of the war, there were draft riots. The North was tired of fighting the war and of going off the war to die. And they rioted. In the South, matters were handled much more efficiently and typically with a bullet if you didn't report or if you left camp. Let me share with you the incredibly tragic story of September 23rd, 1864 in Front Royal. Henry Rhodes, who was described as a small and weak guy, chased after Mosby's men and before he caught up with them was captured by Union forces. This is the day that turned incredibly bad for him. After he was captured, he was drawn between 2 horses and drugged through town from 522, down through town, down Chester Street, down what is probably Royal Avenue, to the area of Wendy's restaurant where he was shot. And then his body was left on the ground for the horses to trample over. His mother did not recognize him at first as he was being drugged down the street between horses, probably because there wasn't much left of him. And she tried to save his life, at which point she had a Union soldier threaten to kill her and stab at her with his bayonet. Imagine that. His name's on that plaque. He was never in the army. However, he was later given a commission posthumously. And this was all done under the watchful eye of a damson-eating George Custer, who later got his due. Henry never...
Mr. Simon, I really apologize.
I will, Ron.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have heard people claim that this monument on the courthouse lawn means that people of color cannot receive equal justice before the law in the courthouse behind this monument. That's a red herring. That's probably the most absurd argument I've heard for its removal. For that to be true, that means that our prosecutor, John Bell, who many of you all know is a racist and all of his staff are racist, that the judges that sit here, Judge Ritchie, Albertson, Hupp, Sharp, Athey, Funk, and Half, they all have to be racist too. And they're not. They're all good and honorable men and women. So that's an absurd statement to state that someone thinks they will not receive equal justice under the law and the equal protection of our laws in our courthouse. Our shared American experience is one of the expansion of freedom and liberty, not its retraction or eradication. I implore you, say no. And I will leave with you the words of a German Lutheran pastor, Martin Niemöller, who you may have heard of. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that'd like to speak? And could we get your name and address as well, please?
Good morning. My name is Gene Kilby. I live at 836 Shenandoah Shores Road. Been a resident of Warren County for the last 4 years. Prior to that, I was a resident from elementary school all the way through high school. I don't have anything prepared because I wasn't aware that this was happening this morning. But I felt obligated to come here to let you know how I feel. The issue is that is it appropriate to have a Confederate statue in front of the House of Justice? Because we all know what the Confederacy represented. And it wasn't on the right side of history. They represented terrible things as far as slavery, as far as doing what's right. I'm the youngest son of James W. Kilby. Now, my father worked tirelessly for justice in this county. And he was met with continued resistance. And that resistance came from many of the people that were descendants of the Confederacy. The statue not only continues the type of hatred and the oppression that my family has been met with over the years. When I was in elementary school, being the only African American there for a number of years, I was the N-word every day by just simple hatred. Not until I got to middle school and got fairly large and strong did that stop. And it still continued out in the street in this county. There's a dark side to this county, and what we're here to do is to ask that this dark side change. In removing the statue from the courthouse, which is supposed to represent justice, is needed to heal this country. We've been doing peaceful protests, but yet we're being threatened with violence. And that's what the Confederacy and the people who want to continue the Confederacy always does. You know, they want to threaten you. They want, back in the days, they lynched you. When my father was trying to get the schools integrated, they shot through our house. They killed our cows. They burned crosses in our yards. So how do you think that the Confederacy feels to me? The gentleman wants to compare the Civil War with all the other wars. It's two totally different issues. The Confederacy split from the United States, and they supported the vicious and savage slavery that occurred. I'm trying to get all of my thoughts together, and I don't want to hold you here forever, but we have to make changes. And now it's time. The issue came up about the statue many years ago, many years ago, but as usual, it was met with the threat of violence. I came to you today to make sure that you carefully consider the real issues. Sometimes people want to take away the real issues and add all other types of things in. And also, some of the names that was mentioned were some of the names that did terrible things to my family years ago. So I'm asking you, this Board of Supervisors, to truly examine all of the facts, examine the wishes of the people of this county that live here today. Not just a few that want to carry on this dark side of history. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak? And may we get your name and address as well, please?
I'm the Reverend Valerie Hayes.
Could we speak in front of the microphone?
Good morning. I'm the Reverend Valerie Hayes. I live at 78 Summit Manor Drive in Front Royal in the county. I'm director of Calvary Episcopal Church here in town. I'm here actually representing myself as a member, as a resident of the county, and I'm speaking as an Episcopal priest. I'm actually not here at this time speaking for my parish. I just learned moments ago that this was taking place. I had been told that the Ministerial Association had been invited to come to a later meeting and discussion on this topic. So I first want to say that I'm both distressed and disappointed to have found out moments ago that this discussion was happening now. There are members of the Ministerial Association who would have been here had they known. As an Episcopalian, part of my baptismal covenant calls us, and we promise, to seek and serve Christ in all persons, to love our neighbors as ourselves, to strive for justice and peace, and to respect the dignity of all persons. And so I come from that place both as a Christian, as someone who came to the Episcopal Church later in life, and to the Episcopal priesthood in my second half of life, and having moved to this community not even 2 years ago. When I came here, I learned rather quickly about the history of massive resistance, that my parish at that time offered its Sunday school classrooms as space to teach white students. The rector at the time was deeply distressed by this, but allowed the lay body and the leadership to vote, and he allowed the vote to go forward to allow those classrooms to be used in that way. As those who know the history know, it was an incredibly difficult time. They had to send their daughters out of the county to continue their education. His name was Frederick Weber. His wife was on the school board at the time. Our parish has been more aware of that history because when we came, it was an anniversary of massive resistance. I quickly got tied in the Ministerial Association, coming to the table, and other organizations. I grew up in Georgia, so even though not from Virginia, I also was a native. I've lived all over the world. In recent months, our country has been thrown again in a different way into the awareness of the history of racism in our country and that deep history of systemic and institutional racism that at this time we can no longer deny. Some of the clergy were approached over a month ago about the interest in having the Confederate Monument relocated or removed. I grew up in Stone Mountain, Georgia, which many of you may know holds the largest Confederate monument in the United States, if not the world. In the discussion about the monument that is here in our county, in our town, on the courthouse, I agree with two things. That one, it honors those people at the time who died, and that is an important part of our community's history, and to those families. I also recognize that its place on the lawn of our courthouse, a place where people expect to go to receive justice, regardless of the color of their skin, or their religion, or their sexual identity, that in that place, it is not appropriate. And so I agree with those who wish to relocate the monument to a place that still allows it to be part of this community's history and honors those families and those families' history. I live in Harmony Hollow. I know Suzanne Silik. I'm aware of the Hickersons. I'm very aware of the history and the importance of those families. But I call on this community and the County Board of Supervisors to work with the Daughters of the American Confederacy and with the Warren Rifles to seek a way forward to relocate the monument that is collaborative and cooperative, that honors the history, but also honors the desires of many in this community, including the ancestors of those families, to remove the monument from the county courthouse grounds. I'm very aware that this community does not need another overt, drawn-out conflict. We do not need any more politically partisan conflict. What we need is a way forward that recognizes our common dignity, our shared history, recognizes the sacrifices made for families at the time involved in a war that they may or may not have wanted to fight in. That history is complicated. The history of massive resistance is complicated. Part of my faith calls for healing, calls for a common understanding that we have more in common than not. And so, again, I come from a place that seeks to respect the dignity of all people, to understand a deeply complicated history, and to know that this statue for many represents a lack of justice, a history of violence, a history of racism. We live in the most amazing part of the state, in a beautiful area. Between the park and the river, we have so much to offer. And I am aware, personally aware, that the monument hinders some people's desire to move and live in our community. It affects our economic strength and development in a negative way. It affects the long-term vitality of this county. I do recognize that this is complicated. Life is lived in the gray. It's lived in the mundane. So I ask all of you, as the Board of Commissioners, Board of Supervisors, to look at the long-term health and vitality and healing of our community. Those who not only have lived here and live here now, but those who want to draw here to strengthen our life together. So again, I do support the relocation of the monument to a place that's appropriate and agreed upon by the members of the Daughters of the Confederacy, the members of the Warren Rifles, and the members of our community as a whole. Again, seeking to love and serve our neighbors, and to respect the dignity of all persons, and to strive for justice.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Final call. The general public comment period is now closed. Thank you everyone for speaking. Any additional questions at all here? If not, we'll go to our interim county attorney.
So many people have spoken today regarding the advisory referendum concerning the Confederate monument on the courthouse lawn. And last week, I had been asked by a couple of supervisors as to what would be the procedure for that. And I had written to you on Thursday. And at that time, I had discovered that if we wanted to be on the referendum for this year, then it would need to have we would need to have a court order entered by August the 14th. Now, of course, this board is not the court. So if since the judge doesn't always work on other people's schedules, it would be wise to act today if you're going to do that. It is now on your consent agenda, and I had sent you yesterday a draft resolution requesting that an advisory referendum be held concerning whether to remove a Confederate monument from the courthouse lawn. Now, this is something that's got to be dealt with a little carefully. What I want to point out to you is that the resolution provides for what the question is going to be, which is, as currently drafted, should the Confederate monument located on the Warren County Courthouse lawn be removed? Now, when I wrote that, I did not realize that there were three petitions out there, one for removal, one for relocation, and one for keeping it where it is. I probably would have chosen the word relocate, which is permitted in the statute. The statute allows you to do an advisory referendum on the question of a proposal to remove or relocate or contextualize or cover. So I might suggest that you might consider changing the word, the question from remove to relocate. Because again, I was not aware that there was a petition to relocate in addition to a petition to remove when I wrote this yesterday. And that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hammond. Yes, sir, that was for the referendum. before, I had a couple of points I wanted to address, but before I go forward with that, I just want to make sure that everybody's okay with Mr. Ham's recommendation for the question to be on referendum, should a Confederate monument located on the Warren County Courthouse lawn be relocated as opposed to removed. Is that okay with everybody? Yes. Okay, so when it comes time for the motion to put that on there, just want to make sure that, couple things, let's see. Where to start? Okay, we have, just to address some of the random comments, we have 2 public comment periods on our agenda. One is for items that are on the agenda, and the second is for items that are not on the agenda. Because the referendum question was added to the agenda, that didn't allow for that first public comment period to be allowed for discussion on the monuments. Because I know some people felt like this was all a surprise or whatever, which it wasn't really. And again, some of the speakers that came here to speak on the monuments, they would have been able to speak on them at the second comment period anyway. So that's the way we have it set up on our agenda, to have 2 separate comment periods. And I think the reason that it kind of the referendum came up was because of a time frame issue. It has to be signed off by August 14th. We do not have another meeting till August 18th. So in the Northern Virginia Daily article, the one gentleman had said that the petitions were going to be brought to us in August. So we had to, at least, if we wanted to go forward with putting it on a referendum, we had to make that decision today. So that's what we did with that. Again, I think there were, the thing about the referendum is it is non-binding. So I think this is going to be an opportunity for people to address this. I appreciate the petitions that are out there for all 3 petitions, but I think the final petition in a non-binding effort will be the referendum, and then everybody will actually have a chance to voice their support on whichever way to go. And I think by doing it there again, we've got until November 3rd when the election is. I think there'll be great opportunities for both sides to commit to a dialogue and talk with each other and not at each other, and be able to hopefully have a better understanding what this means to different people. And with that, hopefully there'll be a resolution, ideally before the referendum, but at least this gives that opportunity for people to start to talk with each other and have a better understanding. Let's see. The other thing, like the one gentleman said, they want to bring a petition to us on the 18th meeting. And I don't know between now and then if the board wants to consider if we want to make that a separate agenda item, almost like a public hearing. Because as you saw today, we had roughly, what was it, 80 minutes, Roger, of public presentations, and probably about 60 of that had to deal with the monuments. So it could turn into rather lengthy discussions, which it could be a good discussion. But if we do it just as a public comment period, I guess be prepared to let that go a little bit longer, making a separate agenda item. I think we have 5 public hearings scheduled that night. So that's just something to think about between now and when the next agenda has to be approved, which I guess would be what, a week from Tuesday? So the 11th. So the board will be thinking about how we want to accommodate that option. And just throwing it there for consideration. No need to comment on that right now, since I just threw it out, but just people can think about it. And that's all I have